Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Goldman. I own MGR Accounting Recruiters. I also produce the Where Accountants Go podcast and Accounting Careers podcast. This presentation I'm going to do is basically on mistakes others make when interviewing, but not you, of course, or basically mistakes that you want to make sure you don't make when interviewing. And I actually put it together for UTSA, the University of Texas here in San Antonio, for their Alpha group. However, with all the coronavirus issues, obviously, there are no live presentations going on these days on the campus. However, I figured instead of just wasting the time, maybe I could record it and then make it available to them as well as anyone else that may benefit from this on YouTube. So we'll be posting on YouTube. Likely that's where you found it at this point when you're watching it, and I hope it's beneficial to you. Like I mentioned, it's titled Mistakes Others Make When Interviewing. I am a CPA, although I don't do accounting myself anymore. The agenda, we're going to talk about mistakes that cost you getting the job you want, but we're also going to talk about mistakes that cause you to get a job that maybe you don't want. And then normally I take questions at this point or later on in the presentation. I welcome you to email me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to help you in any way I possibly can. Just so you understand a little bit about me, I am from San Antonio. I went to a couple schools here in San Antonio, John Jay and St. Mary's, and then I became a CPA, actually very, very early in my career. I did some tax, did some financial statement preparation as well. And then I did a little temporary work, which can really, if the opportunity is right, it can really help you get your career started. Then I became a recruiter. Actually, it was an odd situation. Someone reached out to me, and why not, I thought, and it's just worked out into a beautiful career. I hang out quite a bit in the TX CPA offices, particularly here in San Antonio, sometimes with FEI as well, Financial Executives International. I love to run. I married my high school sweetheart. We have a beautiful daughter. I own MGR Accounting Recruiters, and I run it as well. Also MGR Training, which is basically a training division of MGR Accounting Recruiters. And I record this podcast. Hopefully you've heard the podcast. If you haven't, please come out to our website at mgrar.com, where you can find the Where Accountants Go podcast. I've interviewed many, many successful accountants on there, maybe some pictures you recognize from the youngest person to ever pass the CPA exam, Belicio Cespedes, to CEOs, CAOs, CFOs, and everything in between. I wrote this book, 49 Tips for a Successful Accounting Career, as well as 49 Tips for Working with a Headhunter. You can find it both on Amazon. I do a lot of interviews. I do quite a bit of networking, a lot of meetings, stuff like that. And luckily, because of all that, probably the best thing I get to do and the best thing that my team gets to do is, hello, Jim, John, Joe, Jane, you got the job. It's a really fun part of what we do. So I'm sure that's what you're thinking about by now, and I do want to get to the meat of this presentation so you can get benefit from it. So how do you get the job you want? Or conversely, how do you not get the job that you don't want, which I'll tell you from a career standpoint is just as important. So we're going to look at it from another angle. Usually I do this presentation from the standpoint of tips on what to do to get the job you want. However, we're going to look at from the other side what not to do, what mistakes not to make, and frankly, what not to do to make sure you don't get in a job that you don't enjoy. Well, first of all, in the area of mistakes people make, showing up too early or showing up late feeling like you have a good excuse. Now, I don't think I need to talk a whole lot about showing up late and the bad sides of that. When you show up late, even if you have the best excuse in the world, it sets the tone. It sets a bad tone to start out with. And you don't want to be the person that's coming into a new job with already a few knocks against you. Maybe things go well in the interview after you're late. Maybe, you have a few more interviews and it goes well. You get a great offer. You go to work there. What happens if your car breaks down? What happens if you miss a deadline, or what happens if you have difficulty with something? You'll always be that person that showed up late, to the interview. So yes, if you're running late, you don't have much control, I guess. It's better to show up a little late than not show up at all. However, you want to do everything you can to not be late. So, well, a lot of the students I work with end up doing is they show up too early. 5 minutes early is okay. 10 minutes early might be okay. Any more than that is too much. And the way this usually happens, let's say your commute is going to be 30 minutes to get to a place, maybe even a little less. And you want to make sure you make it on time. And so you give yourself 30 minutes to make it to that interview. And then you start thinking, well, what if there's traffic? What if there's construction? Or that happens a lot where I live. What if there's some delay, basically? And so then you start thinking, well, maybe I better leave 40 minutes ahead of time just so I give myself a 10-minute buffer. That's not a bad idea. So then the night before, you're studying up and you're getting excited. That morning you get up early because you're excited, you get ready, you're excited to go, and it turns out, well, you're actually ready an hour early. So you're sort of bored, you're like, well, I'll just go ahead and drive over there, because you never know, traffic may be bad. And then it turns out, well, traffic wasn't bad, there was no construction. And then you get there in 15 or 20 minutes, and so now you're 40 minutes early. So you sit in your car, you look the person up on LinkedIn, maybe you look up notes on the company or something like that. And that takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And then you think, well, I'm going to go in the building and I'll just hang out a little while. So you go in the building, you hang out a couple minutes, and you get tired of that. And so then you start thinking, well, maybe I'll just go in. It doesn't hurt to be early. And you're walking in 30 minutes early. And then the person you're going to interview with looks sort of like that guy on the phone. The receptionist is calling him. He was hoping to get a little more work done before the interview. He hasn't reviewed your resume, and he's frankly not ready. And so he ends up feeling guilty. He goes ahead, walks out to the lobby, starts the interview early, but he's not prepared and he's not in the right frame of mind. Showing up early is good, a little early, but showing up too early can hurt your chances. You need to, if you get to the building early, if you get to the interview early, do a little more research, circle the block. Whatever you do, don't get out and go into the building, because you'll be tempted, and then you may run into the person that you're supposed to interview with before you want to. So showing up too early can be a bad mistake, frankly. Not understanding when the real interview starts. I just mentioned the receptionist, and you may be thinking, well, everyone knows that you need to be kind to the receptionist. Well, yes, that is part of what I mean. But really, the interview starts the minute you get out of your car, or the minute you drive onto their property. Because what happens if you accidentally cut someone off because you're in a hurry to get to the interview as you're pulling into the driveway or the parking lot, if you will, and that person happens to work at the company and they recognize you as you're going in for the interview. That's bad. So really, you need to be on your best behavior. You need to be your best self from the moment you get in your car, frankly, to go to the place to interview. But definitely as soon as you enter their premises, because you never know who you may run into before the formal interview starts. Another mistake people make is not being ready for the tell me about yourself question. And this is another area where I'm sure you're going, duh, we know that. But I think particularly high achievers, we get ready for all the questions about GPA and goals and dreams and where you want your career to go and stuff like that. But we don't necessarily get a good pitch, or we practice it so much it's not real. And you may think this is basic. You may feel like, well, the college goes over this and I understand, I've been told, et cetera, et cetera. But it really is important. You need to have like a 20 or 30-second answer to, so tell me about yourself. Because it's not just setting the right tone, because you may not even be asked that, frankly. But for interviewers that don't know how to start the interview, or they're maybe not prepared, it is a good way for you to ease them into the interview. And then also it's a good way for you to set the tone, because you have an opportunity here to tell them whatever it is you want to highlight about your background if they give you that opportunity. And you need to take it if it is presented to you. Now, another mistake people make, I hope you like the picture. Another mistake people make is hoping a question won't come up, or a difficult question comes up and frankly, they lie about it. Now, I didn't want to take the lying part out of this presentation, although I know pretty much anybody watching this presentation isn't going to out and out lie about their background. But it is a reality out in the workforce, and so I just wanted to slide that out there as well. But hoping a question won't come up is dangerous. It happens when you've got a great background, you know what you're doing, you feel like you have almost everything they're asking for, but there's one thing in your background maybe that isn't quite key. Maybe your GPA is a little lower. Maybe you didn't work out well with your last boss or a boss way in your past, or maybe you got terminated or something like that. Whatever skeletons you may have in the closet, you can't count on it not coming up in an interview. I was once interviewing an individual, and literally when I got to one point on the resume, they said, "I was hoping you weren't going to ask." And what does that make you want to do? It makes you want to ask even more questions about that situation. So if there is anything in your background that you're not sure how it will go over, you need to practice answering questions about that specific item to a friend of yours or to another professional that you can trust to give you honest feedback, because that's the only way that you're going to be prepared for that kind of thing. And hoping a question won't come up is not a good strategy. Another mistake we make, particularly when we're really focused as students and we're about to enter the professional world, so to speak, is being so focused that we have our game face on, and we're so intent on trying to make a good impression and what we might say and what we need to ask about and all the things we need to remember, that we forget to smile. And I will tell you, from working over 20 years in the employment space, that people hire people they trust, but also people hire people they like. If the person feels comfortable with you, you're a whole lot more likely to get the job you want, versus if you have all the right answers. You can be so intense and have all the right answers and not be selected because you're not relatable. So make sure you smile. Smiling is the easiest way to get the interview started on the right foot. And actually, frankly, it's probably more important in the beginning than it is in the middle or the end. It's that initial impression that they have of you that is important and sets the tone for the interview. Not asking questions. Now, you may wonder what that has to do with EY. I'm normally able to show this a little better when we're doing this presentation in person, but suffice it to say, when I was a student and I was getting out of college, I was interviewing with several of the firms, and Ernst & Young at the time, EY now is how they're branded, they had me come out to their office for that second interview, and so many of the steps went well except one. Basically, I showed up in the morning, had my first interview, met with I believe it was a senior at the time, asked questions, had a good conversation, met with another one, asked questions, had a good conversation, went to lunch with a couple staff members, had a good conversation there. And then I ended up in the partner's office as the last step. And I'll never forget, I was escorted into the partner's office. To make a long story short, I sat there for a couple seconds while he finished up something. He turns around and he says, "So what questions do you have for me?" I was prepared to talk about subjects I liked in school. I was prepared to talk about the experience I had, because I did have some experience at that point. I was prepared to talk about any accounting topic he wanted to talk about or client topic. And instead he asked me what questions I had. And I was surprised. I had already asked all the questions I could think of the other staff members. And so I said, "I don't think I have any." And he paused. He looked at me and said, "Well, thank you for coming." And that was the end of the interview. And it was impossible for him to have had any feedback or any real feedback on me as of yet at that point. I'll never forget, I lost the job at that very moment, or lost the opportunity to advance in the process at that very moment. No matter what, you need to make sure you ask questions in every step of the interview. It doesn't matter if you have already asked that question. It doesn't matter if you really don't have any questions at that point, if you don't ask any questions when you're asked, then basically it's like saying I'm not interested, or I wasn't paying attention, or I haven't really thought about this much. And none of those feelings get you the job. If nothing else, clarify what was said. You can't use the same single question 8 times in an interview. You need to mix them up some, but make sure you ask. If you're asked if you have questions, make sure you ask or clarify something. You can't simply say no. And then a few other surprising mistakes I wanted to talk to you about today. First of all, assuming the interviewer is prepared. You may be surprised, or maybe you're not, but we're all busy. And generally the person that's interviewing you has many other things that they're responsible for as well. It's not just interviewing. So, they may be doing a tax return, doing an audit, something in the financial statement realm. Even if they're in HR, they probably have other things they're doing that day other than interviewing you. And they're busy. They could have been, having a busy day. They're busy doing many, many things. And so they may not have had the opportunity to review your resume like you may think they should, or like even they wanted to. So be prepared, like I said, with that tell me about yourself answer, or to start off the interview yourself if you have to. Say something, because a person may sit down and be scrambling a little bit. Now, obviously, they're going to get into the how the interview body itself, but it may take a couple seconds, and you need to be prepared to start that if you have to on your own. Trying to figure out the right answer. There again, this is a surprising mistake, because we all want to know the right answer and we all want to think we have the right answer, but trying to come up with what the interviewer wants to hear as opposed to the truth, and the real you is always a mistake, actually, because often what you think the interviewer wants to hear is actually not, what they're looking for. They want to know the real you. And so trying to figure out what the right answer is all the time is generally a mistake. This may surprise you, but personally, I feel like hiding your family situation is a bad thing. And the reason I call it a mistake is that if you do get the job, and if the company or the hiring manager really does have an issue with your other commitments, then this is going to be bad for you, and it's going to be bad for them, frankly, as well. It's not going to work out well for either one of you. Now, I don't think you should sit down and immediately say, you have to understand, I have this many children, or I have these responsibilities with parents, or this many siblings, or married, not married. I don't think you should go into all that without being asked. But also, I don't think you should hide it either. And frankly, no, employers really shouldn't ask you about that kind of stuff. But if they do, trying to hide it generally backfires as well. I mean, I would personally, I'd rather have the full discussion than go to work somewhere where it's not going to be a good fit because they're unreasonable about that kind of thing. So if it does come up, yes, discuss it professionally, but trying to hide your responsibilities outside of work is generally a bad thing. If you're going to need to leave early occasionally, or come in late occasionally, or you enjoy the soccer games, so to speak, and that kind of thing, it's better to have those conversations at some point during the interview than waiting until after you're hired to figure out that it's an issue. And then also another mistake people make, I think, is assuming that the outcome depends totally on you. And this is particularly an issue for high-achieving individuals. You can only control so much of that interview. You can control when you get there, how prepared you are. You can control your nerves a little bit. You can control how you answer questions, but you can't control the other side of the equation. You can't control what happened before the interviewer walked into the room. You can't control who else is interviewing for that job. You can't control how they're feeling that day and how that interviewer's day is going. There's just so much you can't control. So you do your best, and then the chips fall where they may. If you're meant to get the job, you get the job. If you're not, well, then sometimes that's a sign as well. And then assuming every job is one you want. I just alluded to this, but frankly, you'll find that many jobs you may interview for, or many employers that are showing an interest initially, might not be the right fit for you. So I do think it's important for you to think about their needs first, and to think about, what the job entails on their side first before you start to figure out if it's, right for you or not. But I do think you need to ask enough questions to figure out if it is a good job for you, on at least in the middle or on the tail end. Try to fit in questions around that area, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have to say what's on the other side of the screen there, I quit, because that's difficult as well. It's better to try to find the right fit in the first place. And as long as we're discussing mistakes people make, I want to talk about a few misconceptions as well. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're not an accounting professional, well, then some of these may not apply to you, but specifically for the accounting professionals or up-and-coming professionals. First of all, I think it's a misconception that you have to start in public accounting. Starting in public accounting does give you some benefits, and public accounting is great training ground for many things, but also many professionals have had a great career just working in industry. Public accounting is wonderful, definitely not for everyone, and I think anyone in public accounting would agree. I personally worked in public accounting some, but I've interviewed many people that started out with a great internship in industry, and it turned into a wonderful career path. So don't feel like you have to start in public accounting if you don't feel it's for you. Or if you get into public and it's not for you, don't feel like you didn't, that somehow you're not going to end up successful, because you are. It's just a matter of finding the right fit. Another misconception is that the CPA certificate doesn't matter if you're not in public. You'll hear this every once in a while, that, well, I'm not going to become a CPA because I don't plan to be in public accounting. The reality is the certificate improves your career almost anywhere you go, even outside of accounting. And if you don't believe that, listen to my podcast, because I've got some great stories of successful individuals whose success is at least partially due to them having the CPA certificate. Now, I want to make sure I'm understood here. All certifications are good, and there are several other certifications in the accounting world that are very valuable. Don't get me wrong. In fact, I've thought about getting some of them myself. It hasn't worked into my plans. However, sometimes you'll hear people say it's as good as the CPA certificate. And this may be my opinion, but I think it's my educated opinion, that the other certifications hold value, but nothing is as widely recognized as the CPA certificate. So if you're thinking about another certification, there's nothing wrong with that. They may be right for you, but make sure you're choosing a certification whose long-term career path really fits your needs, versus thinking it may be easier because there's less education involved or less parts to the exam or something like that, because you want to pick the certification that's going to take you where you want to go. And frankly, the CPA certification is the most universally applicable, so it is something you should consider. A master's degree, I've heard before that it's equivalent to a CPA, and actually at this point, that's many years ago, at this point you almost have to have a master's, not quite, but to become a CPA. Don't stop with the master's. If you have time and have the resources to pursue a certification, it really is something that will benefit you long-term, even with the master's degree. Another thing I see is people picking, particularly at the student level, people picking the highest salary as the only differentiator between jobs. If you are in a situation where you have a couple offers, chances are the salary levels aren't going to be that different. And frankly, if they are, you really should ask yourself why that is. But usually, particularly at the entry-level jobs, the salary differences are a couple $1,000s, if that, sometimes less than $1,000. You really need to pick where you're going to be the most successful, because if you pick the culture where you're going to be the most successful, then the salary will take care of itself. If you pick the highest salary, but it's a place where you can't see yourself being successful more than a few months, well, then it's going to end up backfiring on you, or a few years. It's going to end up backfiring on you. You need to pick the place that has the best culture for you. And then another misconception, because there again, this was prepared for students. And so if you're still in school, another misconception is sometimes I'm going to take care of school and then I'll go network and meet the people I need to meet. And really, you need to be doing that your junior and senior year, because by the time you graduate, you've missed the first few rounds of hiring, and it's very difficult to catch up. You need to meet the people that you need to meet before you graduate, for sure. And then just for those that don't find the job that they're looking for through on-campus interviews and other school activities, if you have to go out and look on your own, if you have to take your job search into your own hands, and if we enter a difficult job market, that's going to be the case for a lot of people. Don't assume that a company has no need or no openings if there's nothing listed on their website. It could just be that they're still putting together those plans. And if you approach a company before they list something, sometimes you get in on the front end and it can pay off very well. And then the slide before the slide, if you remember just one thing, I know I've covered a whole lot in this presentation. I appreciate you sticking with it this long. If you remember just one thing, be yourself. Yes, don't change, be yourself, but be your best self. You want to put your best foot forward. So like I mentioned, if there's any questions you have, there's my contact information. You can contact me through email or through phone. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. I will tell you, if you're watching this online, our expertise really lies in the accounting area. So if you're not in accounting, we'll try to help, but our expertise may not apply quite as much. We do specialize in helping accountants find the right opportunities, but feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Thank you very much for joining us today.